Connecting IRL, cultivating a connected life and society in the face of what the Surgeon General calls a loneliness epidemic. It's an issue that led renowned sex therapist Dr. Ruth Westheimer to switch her focus in her last years and co-write her last book, The Joy of Connections, with our next guest here, Emmy Award-winning journalist Allison Gilbert. Allison, good morning to you. It's great to have you.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays. So we were mentioning Dr. Ruth there. Of course, a lot of people know her work as an intimacy expert or sex therapist. But what was it that inspired her interest in the issue of loneliness?
She knew loneliness throughout her entire life. She grew up in Germany, and during the Holocaust, she was separated from her parents when she was just 10 years old and never saw her parents again. And then years later, she was married and her husband passed away, and she spent decades without him. So she knew the loneliness of being an orphan, the loneliness of being a refugee, and the loneliness of being a widow. And she had something to say. She didn't retreat into life by herself. She leaned in to her remaining relationships and she cultivated new ones. It was a masterclass in how we can all engage and fill our lives with love and not sadness and anger and resentment, which she could have done. That could have been a choice, and she didn't do it.
And the ability of a strong woman to turn that, as Robin likes to say, the mess into her message is so powerful. And I am fascinated with the idea of a sex therapist who would talk about sex, but then focusing on connection, which is, I mean, at the heart of that. And connection is what we all as humans need. What do you think is the biggest lesson in the book?
Well, it's actually really surprising. You would think a book about connection would be about how we relate to other people, but the most surprising lesson is this. Who are you when you look in the mirror? Are you doing anything that might be inadvertently pushing people away? How do you behave with other people? Do you lean in? Are you interested in what somebody else has to say? Are you kind of giving off a vibe that you're not really that interested? It's all about you when you look in the mirror. How are you behaving and acting in this world? And how could you do it differently to invite more people in?
And every relationship is a reflection of us.
And I love that we're all checking ourselves, like, oh, wait, are we listening closely? Dr. Ruth, she was curious.
Yes.
She was curious.
Yes.
And you actually say that that's one of the rules for making these new connections. And I think that that's something everybody's going to be looking at as we go into 2025. What are those rules?
Listen, how boring would it be to keep talking about yourself in every conversation? I know we're all so tempted to do it, but if you keep talking about your own kids and their marvelous achievements or your own complaints, listen, we all have our own things to complain about, but the trick to deepening connections is leaning in and saying, what's going on with you, Gio? What's happening with your family? And actually waiting for the answer, not just pausing until it's your next time to talk. And so be curious. And you know what? Dr. Ruth was just so good at this. Every time I sat down to interview her and take notes for this book and do the writing and the work, she wouldn't let me begin until she asked me, how are you doing?
Wow.
How's your family? I mean, Dr.
Making
Ruth,
that connection with
she,
you?
it was so great. I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
Another one of the steps that you lay out here is to be vulnerable. Tell us how we can do that. Everybody says they want to be, but how do you actually do it?
If you keep your conversation up here where the oxygen is thin and everything is great all the time, I mean, what baloney? We all have problems. You have to go where the meat is. If you don't throw meat into a conversation and be real, like for example, if you've lost a job, if your spouse is not doing well, maybe there's a chronic illness in the family, share that information. It may be uncomfortable at first, but once you try, you know what it does? It cracks open an opportunity for somebody else to share. And it's in that moment of real connection and real sharing where we can deepen our connections. The baloney of lightness gets in the way. So we got to get rid of that and get deep.
And we have to be willing to be authentic and vulnerable, even if it makes someone else uncomfortable, because they're not ready to go there yet. I'm loving everything you're saying.
Oh, that's
really, we incorporate it a lot in our jobs. That's why the three of us have the connection that we have. You say, be a connector. but don't be a counter. What do you mean by that?
Oh my God, this is so great. So Dr. Ruth was a party giver, right? So she was a connector. She didn't wait for social opportunities to happen. She hosted them in her apartment, her small New York City apartment all the time. She invited people over. You're not passive, you are proactive. We all get that feeling of we're not being invited places, so don't wait for the invitation. You do the inviting, you send the text, you pick up the phone, and you make the plan. If there's a walk you want to go on in your neighborhood, send the group text, make that group chat, and you be the designer, but never keep count. Don't keep that invisible ledger in your head that says, you know what? I'm going to stop inviting, I'm going to stop connecting because I'm not getting that reciprocity. Reciprocity at the end of the day is never the goal.
Okay.
It's not to keep count. It's for you to spend time with people you care about.
Allison, thank you so much for your time. We really, of course, we're fully engaged here.
It's a great holiday
It is
gift.
called The Joy of Connections, and it is out now. Allison, thanks
And
again.
we're going to have to stay connected.
You got it. You got it. And